Welcome to Mornings with Meep. I've got my book mug. I'm going to talk about a book specifically and then some other books. The book We by Yevgeny Zamyatin. This was a science fiction, well, kind of a science fiction novel from early in the Soviet Union, and my understanding it was the first book to be officially banned by the Communist Party, and I'll look up the references on that. And it's kind of an interesting precursor to Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, George Orwell's 1984, not really Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451, but also Ursula K. Le Guin's The Dispossessed. They all have different aspects that they're pulling from this book, whether or not directly influenced. So the idea behind We is, again, a perfected society of some sort. So this is similar to all of these other dystopias, perfected from a specific point of view. And it's kind of in reaction to H.G. Wells' science positive writings. But you see some influences from like The Time Machine. The citizens of one state are numbers. They're called numbers. Think of, I'm not a number, I'm a human being. Well, they're numbers. The way this really works is you get recognizable characters, and actually one of the characters, R13, I actually thought the man's name was Arthur Teen. It's the letter R followed by 13. The main character, it's written from his point of view, is D503. And he has his longtime girlfriend, I guess, O91. And there's a new woman in his life, or new number, I330. So the women start with vowels, and the men start with consonants. There's an old lady at the desk, which is just called U. We don't know her number. There's this guy. It's an interesting situation. He calls S. He's got weird ears. Ear flaps, I think they call them. Ear wings. It's a very well-written book. The conclusion is not at all surprising if you've read 1984 or Brave New World. These books never end happily, okay? So there's no spoiler on this, and this book is almost 100 years old at this point, but I don't want to give too much away. I do want to talk about some of the influences on the book. I mentioned H.G. Wells. This book was a little bit in reaction to H.G. Wells, and you see some of this in this Taylorisms. This refers to a man, and I'll have to look up his name, Taylor, who was known for his time in motion studies. So this was the perfection of the factory of the of processes that everybody was going to be ultra efficient. This was the height of industrial rationality. You see this coming out in one of the themes with regards to this surgery that supposedly removes imagination from the brain. And obviously this is something that will come at the conclusion of the book. So that's one of the things, that you have this ordered society, the height of rationality, but also you have these numbers, they're in this city, and you keep getting told about some 200-ish years war, and this green wall is around the city. Outside the green wall is basically a state of nature, and you have a different kind of humanoids, but somehow they kind of infiltrate into the cities. It's kind of iffy. Anyway, it reminds you of the Morlocks and the Eloi from The Time Machine, in that you have the industrialized, we're rational, etc., developed, and then the kind of baser nature Morlocks, and the people beyond the green wall. So lots of interesting ideas. It's written in an interesting way because it's kind of a diary by D503. He is an engineer. He uses a lot of mathematical, engineering, and physics analogies. One came up that I'm still wondering if it's the translator or the author who screwed this up, calling the square root of -1 irrational. It's not irrational. It's just imaginary, which makes a lot more sense if you're trying to remove the imagination from the brain. So imaginary actually would have made more sense than calling it irrational. So I'm not sure about that. It is a bit distracting for somebody who does know math and science pretty well if that was a screw up. The rest of them, the rest of the engineering and science metaphors seem to work pretty well. Um, Now, there's an interesting aspect to this book that you can see it's been influenced by Dostoevsky, because there are a couple of confrontations between D503. One is a confrontation with S, where you realized that he thought he was unburdening himself and he was basically the butt of a joke. It's not exactly literally. And then another where he comes face to face with the benefactor. These call to mind Raskolnikov's interactions with the police, inspectors, and various other people who are involved in investigating the murder of the old pawnbroker and her sister. That is one aspect. And the other aspect, of course, is that whole, essay disquisition in Brothers Karamazov with the Grand Inquisitor. That said, this is a lot shorter. The interaction between the benefactor and D503 is a lot shorter than the Dostoevsky pieces. So that's one of the drawbacks. It did seem a bit rushed at the end. That may have been from a literary point of view, but it seems not fully complete to me. I also had the same problem with Brave New World. That seemed a little slapdash, especially towards the end of the book. And if I were to rate, so I want to talk about my rating of these dystopias. I'm just going to talk about 4 of them. I don't want to talk about the dispossessed. So we have we have Orwell's 1984, we have Huxley's Brave New World, and we have Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451. Of the 4, I think the worst is Brave New World. It's pretty thin, and Huxley is not as good a writer, just the craft of writing just sentences, as the other 3. The other 3 are much better. I'd say the best one is Orwell's 1984, and it's kind of interesting because Brave New World and we have the society, we see it as outsiders as a dystopia, but ostensibly to the people inside, it's all about happiness and feeling good and having pleasure and that kind of thing. So they're kind of sunny, but we're seeing the dark side of that. With regards to Fahrenheit 451, they're not really poor, but they're spiritually poor and they're empty, and it's depressing, and you can see the despair in the people that they have these empty lives. And also you have the constant war, and that's kind of like 1984. 1984, there's basically nothing happy in it. But what makes it the best of the books is Orwell is the best writer. He's just better at the craft, and you get a complete novel. I didn't feel like that was rushed or you're missing anything. And it didn't seem like some of the interrogation and the interactions went on for too long. You don't want to feel like you're in the middle of an Ayn Rand novel where someone is going to be talking for 200 pages on their philosophy. That is not compelling fiction. But with regards to We and Fahrenheit 451, I actually put them on the same level. They seem equivalent to me in terms of they're very evocative. Both Bradbury and Zamyatin are kind of good at setting scenes and getting a feel. They're just different in terms of the way Bradbury sets his scene or sets his world. And with regards to Zamyatin, it's a first-person point of view, and you're trying to get an idea of someone who's high in that system and how they perceive it. And it's a really interesting book. I listened to it via audiobook. I highly recommend the version I listened to, and I'll link to it. But I hope the next time I talk about a book, it'll be a happier book. See you next week.